Dissociation is disconnection from ourselves and our surroundings. Dissociation happens on a spectrum. On the lower end of the spectrum, it can happen as daydreaming or zoning out. On the opposite side of the spectrum, it can look like dissociative identity disorder, which used to be known as multiple personality disorder. In the middle of the spectrum are common experiences of dissociation, which are known as depersonalization and derealization. In this video, we will discuss these forms of dissociation, their symptoms, and why they happen. We will also look at what you can do to help yourself if you're currently struggling with dissociation. Hi, my name is Micheline Malouf, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do so. I make videos weekly to help you understand yourself better and take charge of your mental health. So, what is dissociation? To better help you understand dissociation, let me explain why and how it happens. During a traumatic event, our mind will initially freeze and scan. This is the deer caught in headlights type of freeze. It's usually really quick as our mind determines what the next course of action is. For example, your mind will first decide whether it can run away or flee from the threat to get it to safety. If it assesses that it can find safety by escaping, it will set your body up and get you to safety. If not, it will then determine if it can fight off the threat to keep you safe. If the danger is too big and too dangerous and there is no way to beat it, it will resort to the third option. The third option is the second type of freeze response that slows down body functioning to get us to escape mentally. This is when our body functions slow down, our heart rate drops, breathing slows, and we prepare for the worst. This type of freeze is known as flop. During flop, our mind determines that if we can't avoid the threat, it is best to detach and escape from it consciously. This way, we feel as little pain as possible and give ourselves the best chance for survival. This is where dissociation occurs. In simpler terms, dissociation initially happens when a traumatic experience occurs and our mind finds it too overwhelming or too painful to be present. One of the most common questions I get is, if I'm not in the traumatic environment anymore, why does this keep happening to me? This is because dissociation becomes one of our autonomic processes of coping. You might dissociate at slight environmental triggers and find it challenging to stay present. For example, suppose that you grew up in an environment where anger and aggression were common. In that case, you might have felt helpless to do anything as a child. You couldn't go anywhere and you certainly couldn't fight. So the only option was to freeze, to dissociate. You may have resorted to daydreams and fantasy worlds, or maybe you check out in other ways. Although you may be all grown up now and out of that environment, you might find that you still dissociated when there is yelling happening around you. Loud voices and angry faces may become triggers whether or not they are directed at you. The next question is, well, doesn't my mind know that I'm not in actual danger? No, and here's why. Biologically, experiences are processed through the brainstem first. The brainstem is the oldest part of our brain. A trigger from the environment, like yelling, causes an automatic stress response to take over. And since our brain can't tell time, it can't differentiate the past from the present. It can't rationalize that you're an adult now and that you can protect yourself. The part of the brain that can tell time is the prefrontal cortex, which goes offline in times of perceived threat. Everything in our environment goes through the brainstem first before it can move up and be processed by the cortex. If environmental information were to go through the cortex first, we wouldn't be triggered, but we wouldn't survive because it would take too long to activate our survival brain. Since the brainstem is responsible for our survival, it needs to shut the cortex off because we don't have time to intellectualize things when we are in actual danger. If you have experienced trauma, your brain may be constantly on alert, always misfiring information and seeing threats where there aren't any, which is why you might find yourself in a chronic state of dissociation. This is why a lot of therapy is focused on helping you regulate your nervous system, regulate your body, and giving you tools to help your cortex come back online. We will review some tools that you can use for this at the end of this video, so make sure you stick around. So is checking out or zoning out really a form of dissociation? Well, the definition of dissociation is to be disconnected from ourselves and from our environment. So technically, anytime you are checked out or zoned out, it can be considered a form of dissociation. However, it would not be a clinically diagnosable form. Many of us dissociate by zoning out or checking out when we are tired, stressed, or overwhelmed. You may have heard of two types of dissociation, one called depersonalization and the other one called derealization. So what are they and what are the differences between them? Depersonalization is when we feel detached from ourselves and our bodies. You might feel like you're floating above yourself or another person watching your own thoughts and behaviors. You might feel like a robot, like your movements may feel distorted and choppy. You might feel like you're not in control of your own movements, behaviors, or even speech. You might look at yourself and see your body look distorted, almost like looking at yourself in a funhouse mirror. You might appear very big or very small and shrunken and totally disproportionate. You might feel emotional and physical numbness. You struggle to feel anything including sadness or joy. You're flat. You might not even feel anything physically. When you touch your own hands, it may feel numb. You might also feel disconnected from your own past and your own memories. You don't have emotional attachments to them. With derealization, we feel detached from our environment, surroundings, and those around us. So in this case, you might feel emotionally disconnected from people you care about. You might talk to people and feel like they're characters in virtual reality or a video game. They just don't feel real to you. You might feel alienated or unfamiliar with your surroundings. For example, you might feel like you're living in a movie or a dream. You might notice that your surroundings are distorted. The world might look foggy or blurry. You might see things in black and white, and some people actually say they feel like the world is in 2D. You might experience detachment of time. Even things that just happened moments ago may feel like they happened such a long time ago. The world might seem misshaped, almost like you're looking at a Salvador Dali painting. Things seem to have distorted shapes and colors. You might see them as really big or really small and disproportionate. Most people experience both derealization and depersonalization because they can happen at the same time, but you can also experience one and not the other. Another question I get is, what is maladaptive daydreaming, and is that a form of dissociation? Some people experience maladaptive daydreaming, which is when the daydreams are intense and long-lasting. We find it challenging to come back to the present. We may develop entire storylines and characters and live in our imagination for longer than we're living in the present. Most people experience this daydream while pacing or participating in repetitive movements. People who experience this type of daydreaming report that they don't want to come back to reality and prefer to stay in their daydreams. This is considered a form of dissociation, and it usually occurs when we're younger and living in traumatic experiences. We create these fantasy worlds or daydreams to escape our reality because life is too dangerous and too overwhelming. A little higher on the spectrum of dissociation, we have something called dissociative amnesia. Dissociative amnesia is a disorder that occurs after trauma, where people tend to forget or lose parts of their memories. Usually these memories are autobiographical. We can lose the memory of the event and who we are, our name, our age, and what we have been doing. The forgetfulness in dissociative amnesia is not the same as the normal day-to-day forgetfulness we all experience. In some rare cases, people experience dissociative fugue. This is when a person forgets most or all of their personal information, like their name, their personal history, family, friends, etc., and they sometimes even travel to a different location and adopt an entirely new identity. Most cases of dissociative amnesia are relatively short. Often memories return wholly and suddenly. Memory recovery may be triggered by something like the person's surroundings or therapy. Dissociative amnesia is not that common. And finally, let's talk about dissociative identity disorder. What's dissociative identity disorder? Dissociative identity disorder was previously known as multiple personality disorder. This is one of the most severe forms of dissociation, and it is experienced on the highest end of the spectrum. DID is caused by severe trauma during early childhood. Usually, the trauma experience is extreme, repetitive, physical, sexual, and/or emotional abuse. Developing DID is necessary for survival for people that have experienced that level of severe trauma. To survive, the person shuts off and dissociates themselves from a situation or experience that is too violent, traumatic, or painful to assimilate with their conscious self. The person with DID has alters, which are different identities. Each identity has its own age, sex, race, postures, gestures, and distinct ways of talking. Alters can be people, fantasy characters, animals, and objects. The alters can also be so distinct that they even have different medical disorders. For example, one alter may have diabetes and require insulin, while another alter may be perfectly healthy. The shifts between alters are called switching. And switching can happen in seconds, minutes, or it can take days. I can talk about DID further in future videos, but for now, let's talk about what you can do if you struggle with dissociation. I have a few tips for you, but before I get into them, these tips are helpful for people experiencing dissociation in the forms of zoning out, checking out, derealization, and depersonalization. If you're experiencing more severe forms of dissociation like DID, you must work with a skilled therapist that has training in the treatment of DID to get help getting your parts to work together as a whole system and to avoid unintentional harm or further traumatization from the therapist. So the first thing that we need to do is to practice grounding tools daily. Remember how I said that our prefrontal cortex is offline when we dissociate? This means that we need to activate our cortex to get out of dissociation. To do so, we must return to the here and now. Daily practice will make it easier to come out of dissociation faster and make you more aware of perceived threats versus actual threats. Since dissociation causes us to disconnect from our bodies, we need to rebuild the mind-body connection. We can do this by doing activities that connect both our minds and our bodies. One exercise you can try if you've experienced depersonalization is called the avatar tool. You can practice this by holding your hands out in front of you, closing your eyes, taking a deep breath, and when you open your eyes, look at your hands as if it's the first time you've ever looked at them. Notice every detail, name it, say it out loud. Then start to introduce movement. Notice each sound, crack, or sensation. Notice what it feels like. Is it cold or is it hot? Then begin to use your hands to do something, like pick something up and notice what the object feels like in your hands and what you feel in your body as you lift or use this object. You can continue doing this for as long as you need to help get your mind and your body to connect and to give you back the feeling that your body is yours. This requires constant practice, daily practice, and patience, so don't expect it to cure your dissociation immediately. Anything we do requires time and training to rebuild neural pathways in our brain. When you're disconnected from your environment through derealization, you need to ground yourself in your environment to help your body reorient itself into what is around you. A few ways you can do this is to apply pressure to yourself and to your surroundings. You can do this by holding weights in your hands, pushing up against the wall, or applying pressure to your body against something. You can also put on a weighted blanket. Then, once you've done that, look around and name things that you see. Touch those things. Notice their texture, their temperature. Listen to their sounds. And then eat something to engage your sense of taste. Using all 5 senses after orienting your body is so helpful to get you grounded. Again, as with anything, daily practice is essential, and nothing I give you here is a quick fix. Other things that you can practice daily include shaking and moving and tapping. When you feel a little bit zoned out or checked out, try shaking and introducing movement into your body. This will help with the blood flow and increase oxygen levels in your body, and it also helps remind your mind that you're not in danger. I also highly recommend participating in activities that naturally engage the mind and body, like yoga, Qigong, and Tai Chi. There are so many free videos full of classes online that you can use. And finally, be patient with yourself. Practice self-care. This is not an easy process and it takes time. Be gentle and remind yourself that healing is not linear, and seek professional help if you have access to it and can afford it. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned a little bit more about dissociation and what you can do to help yourself. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comment box below. And as always, I will see you in the next video.